My husband and I have been married for over 10 years now. It's a strange thing to say, but he's too nice, and it almost cost us our marriage. Early on, when we were first dating, I noticed he had a lot of friends, and I thought it was great, especially as my ex had no friends of his own, and that was a problem in our relationship. I didn't mind him going gaming with them on his Thursday nights or how people were always popping in. I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world that he chose to be with me. He had a great personality. He's smart, kind, generous to a fault, and he's got the best sense of humor of anyone I've ever met. Those things started out seeming just all hunky-dory, but as we got deeper into the relationship, I saw the dark side of being with someone who was an enabler and a people-pleaser. What first seemed just like plain kindness and generosity warped into what I felt like was him being a doormat. I started to notice that all those friends of his who were always stopping in, eating his food and borrowing his money weren't there for him when he needed something. When he got cancer and was going through chemo, no one came to visit, other than a couple of friends, but certainly not all the people I had seen him bend over backwards for time and time again. I stood by his side, saw him through it all, and as he was recovering, I started to really think about what it meant that his friends hadn't shown up for him. I assumed he would be thinking about it too, and that he would adjust how much he was there for them. I learned quickly, though, that he wasn't changing anything. He still jumped when they called, lent them money when they needed it, and drove them all over the place when they needed rides. I just didn't get it. I could understand being there for those that showed up for him, but how he wasn't mad or disappointed when the rest baffled my mind. That's when I realized that he was the kind of person with a big heart, but too big to not be taken advantage of. It started to cause a problem in our relationship. I asked him why he was lending money to people with jobs and their own families when he barely had any money of his own. Since his treatment, he was too sick to work. He was collecting disability, but it was a fraction of what he was making as a chef before he got sick. When a young family moved in across the street, little did I know it would launch a series of events that would change our lives. They seemed like an average family, a mom, a dad, and a young boy of 8 years old. The boy's name was Jimmy, and he was very polite and sweet. We figured out pretty quickly that he didn't seem to get a lot of attention from his parents. He was always playing by himself and just riding up and down the street. He ended up at our place one day as we were gardening in the front. Darren introduced both of us to Jimmy, and from that day on, he visited more and more. Whenever we were doing yard work or outdoor house maintenance, Jimmy was there. When I went to work, Darren said Jimmy was over more and more. It seemed like his parents kept him home from school too much, but I didn't want to get involved. One day, Jimmy came over with a bad bruise on his arm and neck. We asked him about it, but he just shrugged and said he fell off his bike. We knew that couldn't be true, but left it alone. After more bruises kept appearing, Darren started to want to get involved. I cautioned him that we didn't know what we were dealing with. We had seen his parents from a distance, and for a lack of a better word, I would say they definitely looked a little rough. The mom looked like she was maybe on drugs. She was freakishly skinny, and the dad didn't look much better. We heard a lot of yelling from the house, and one night, things escalated. I came home from work to find Darren peeking out from behind the living room curtains at their house. He said that Jimmy had come over earlier with new bruises and that he had had enough. He was trying to catch them in the act so he could call child services. He was becoming obsessed. I felt bad that it didn't bother me as much as it seemed to bother him. But then I left the house every day, and Darren was still home recovering from his chemo and radiation. I guess he didn't have as much going on. Every day, though, Darren would talk to me about Jimmy, and I was starting to lose interest. It's not like I wanted him to be hurt, but I wanted my husband back. He seemed obsessed with this boy. I understood that it was because of the kind person he was, that he couldn't ignore a kid he thought was being abused. At his next checkup, his doctor told him his tumors were still growing and that he had to go back on chemotherapy. I was terrified. One thing the doctor talked to me about was that chemo often had the effect of causing paranoia and aggression in men. She told me to prepare myself for anything and everything. As he got further into the round, he did seem to become more paranoid and aggressive. He was increasingly obsessed with rescuing Jimmy from his life of abuse, as Darren called it. I was flabbergasted to find out that Darren had set up a camera at the front of our house. It was pointed across the street, of course, and he was hoping to catch something incriminating. The next step was just too far. I caught him sneaking over there and trying to set up a camera that was aimed inside their living room window. I asked him what was going on and told him that it was completely inappropriate. I didn't understand why he couldn't focus on his treatment rather than what was happening to Jimmy. He seemed to listen and said that he would back off. That didn't happen, though. One day, as I pulled into our driveway, I happened to look across the street and saw Darren standing at Jimmy's front door, having words with the dad. I could tell, even from that distance, that things were getting heated. I could see Darren's cheeks getting redder and his gesticulations getting more and more noticeable. I turned the car off and watched for a minute. I reminded myself that it was because Darren cared so much that I was so attracted to him initially. I couldn't get him to turn off his concern and kindness just because it was inconvenient to me. I walked over there hesitantly and asked what was going on. Darren spun around when he heard my voice. He said he had had enough of seeing new bruises every day on Jimmy and that it was time they were called out on it. I took Darren by the arm and tried to coax him into crossing back across the street. Jimmy's dad was goading him, saying things like, "That's right, go back with your mommy. I'll be sure to give Jimmy an extra long goodnight hug tonight just for you." Darren almost ripped away from me and attacked the guy, but I managed to get in between them. Before I knew it, though, he had reached around me and had the guy by the scruff of his shirt. Darren said, "If you ever come near me or touch that kid again, you'll hear back from me." It seemed like only a second that I looked away, but before I knew it, the guy had pulled out a gun. We lived in Texas, so this was not particularly surprising. Still, I put my hands in the air and said, "Okay, everyone, this is getting out of hand, and we really need to take a deep breath." Darren froze. His instinct to protect me kicked in, and I could see he was coming to his senses in the face of impending danger. The guy was waving the gun around but kept pointing it right at my face. He said, "I know what would really tick you off. If I was to put a hole in your lovely wife, would that make you stay off my case?" Darren apologized for sticking his nose into his business and pulled me behind him. He backed up with his body protecting me. We made it back across the street and locked the door behind us. Well, at least I can report him for threatening us. I was mad, really mad. I said to him that I knew something like this was going to happen. He was too kind, cared too much, and needed to focus on himself. I said, "Isn't it enough that I could have lost my life just then? All because you're obsessed with a boy?" We reported the family just the same, but we did it from a new address and never looked back. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button.
And tell us in the comments section what you thought about this story.